44. Disarmed and facing the onslaught of a rampaging bull, Gryph made a desperate gamble. He forced mana into his boots, and he felt every fast-twitch muscle fiber in his body flush with energy. With his speed doubled, he dodged the Barrow King's clumsy onslaught. He dove to the side, drew his ice dagger, and flipped over a sideways swipe of his enemy's staff. The power of his boots boosted his leaping ability as well, and he came down behind the Barrow King, thrusting the dagger into the base of the creature's neck, where skull met spine. Gryph was rewarded with a dry snap as the dagger buried itself into the top vertebrae. He filled the dagger with mana, and the frigid field expanded, crumbling already brittle bones. The Barrow King wailed in agony and spun to and fro, trying to dislodge Gryph, but he held fast. "Avernerios!" boomed a voice that both was and was not Wick's, and a point of crimson light appeared a dozen feet in front of the Barrow King. The point expanded into a vertical line, and then the line widened into a door to hell. This time, when Gryph saw the horrid devil rushing towards the door, he did not fret. He smiled. His momentary glee distracted him enough for the Barrow King to grab his arm in a cold, skeletal embrace. Iron-strong fingers of bone dug into Gryph's forearm, and he heard bones crack. Gryph yanked the dagger free with his other hand and tried to thrust it into the side of the ancient skull. But the Barrow King's other arm spun in its socket in a way no living arm could and grabbed his wrist. Now trapped, Gryph could only watch as the Barrow King's head twisted 180 degrees, his gaping mouth mere inches from Gryph's face. Gryph's entire world became that gaping maw of death and the horror it was about to spew forth. Wick chanted the final word of the summons, nearly tearing his mortal vocal cords to shreds. The gnome collapsed to one knee as the infernal portal tore a slice into reality. The strain of summoning Hell's lieutenant made him dizzy and weak. He willed himself to get to his feet just as the massive demon crossed the threshold into this realm. Frantic eyes searched for Tifila, and he smiled when he saw her exiting the cage. She gave Zeg a quick pat on the head, eliciting a smile and a coo from the imp. Her eyes darted up to his, and he sent the thought, "Run," through the mental link Ovrim had given them. She grinned up at him, shook her head no, and his mind filled with her voice. "No, my love, I am here with you to the end." Wick scowled, but knew there was no talking her out of it. Tifila summoned blinding white energy to her hands. She unleashed 2 life bolts at the nearest dread knight, taking the creature unawares from behind and blowing its head from its shoulders. Avernerius swung his tree-length sword of flame back and forth in slow, almost lazy arcs. Each swing decapitated or bisected the torso of a dread knight. Dirge, who had been fighting the dread knight the demon had just bisected, backflipped away from Avernerius's third swing. The arc of flame just missed the thief as he thudded hard to the ground. Wick couldn't help but laugh. Apparently, he'd forgotten to name the traitor bastard as friendly. "Whoops," Wick said aloud. "A little help here?" came Gryph's frantic mental call, pulling Wick from his temporary glee. He saw his friend being stretched by the Barrow King's misaligned limbs and saw the Revenant's head spin. Wick jumped from the balcony and slid down a support column. As he landed, he threw his arms out to the side and pulsed mana into them. 2 short swords of blazing crimson darkness appeared in his hands, and he ran towards the Barrow King's back. He leapt up, just as the cloaked shadow's shoulders hunched and buckled like a child about to vomit. Wick brought both summoned swords down on the Barrow King's shoulder. The chthonic metal sliced through shadow and bone and severed the arm. Wick landed with agile grace as Gryph brought both feet up to kick the Barrow King in the head. The wraith's head was knocked to the side as a stream of black ooze erupted from its mouth. It covered both the Barrow King's arm and Gryph's wrist. Gryph screamed in agony as his arm burned, but the revenant's skeletal arm was immune to the acidic damage. The creature's head turned back to Gryph, ready to hurl another volley of black death. Gryph was injured, but he was a warrior born. He lifted the Barrow King's severed skeletal arm with his left hand and crammed it with tremendous force down into the Barrow King's open mouth. The arm blocked the torrent of black ooze, allowing only a trickle to bubble forth. Gryph landed on his feet and tossed several of his throwing knives at the Barrow King. They didn't do too much damage, but he recalled and tossed them again. The small blows slowly whittled at the lich's health. Wick helped Gryph to his feet and doused the taller man's arm with the last of his silver solutions. The acid dissolved under the metal's onslaught, and Gryph's pain abated. Gryph nodded his thanks and was about to say something when the Barrow King screamed again. Gryph pushed Wick aside as several more globes of silver soul energy flowed from the defeated Dread Knights and down the Barrow King's throat. In an instant, the creature was again at 100%. Even the severed arm regrew. He snapped the new arm out, and the fallen staff flew to its hand. With a dramatic 2-handed thrust, the Barrow King smashed the staff into the floor. The massive doors at the far end of the room opened. "He's summoning reinforcements. Send the demon!" Gryph yelled. Wick nodded and sent a mental command to his demonic minion. "Block the door. Kill anything that enters." With a final backward swing, Avernerius decapitated the second of Dirge's cohorts. Alone among enemies, Dirge turned his attack to Ovrim. As if predicting his question, Ovrim's voice filled the communal channel. "I have this. Help Gryph." "So, this is how it ends," Dirge said, his dagger held forth. Ovrim knew the skill with blades possessed by the leader of the Grey Company. He had seen it many times before and faced it once. The blades Dirge held were not so much tools as extensions of the wiry man's deadly intent. But Ovrim was an adjudicator, and he would dispense justice. The Zaidai settled his mind, and his body eased like water. He sent an invocation into the ether and felt spirit energy flow down his arm into his saber. While Dirge's weapons may be extensions of his body, Ovrim's weapon was an extension of his will, and it wasn't his only weapon. Ovrim lashed out with his thoughts, attempting to stun Dirge into submission. The dagger-wielding thief threw up a barrier. For an assassin, the smaller man was an adept thought mage. Dirge grinned at Ovrim. The Egyptian slashed with his left dagger, an obvious feint meant to distract Ovrim from his mental assault. Another opponent would have succumbed to the stunning mental bolt Dirge sent, but few could overcome the defenses of a fully trained adjudicator. Ovrim let the ether in, and his mind expanded. Dirge's mental attack flowed over him like river water over a stone, and Ovdam parried the dagger strike with ease. He pushed his momentum into a kick to Dirge's stomach. Pain and surprise tore across the smaller man's face before a cruel grin replaced them.
"Oh, Ovi, you've been holding back on me, darling."
"You are a traitor, Dirge, and I am here to pass judgment on you."
"You sanctimonious jackanapes! Who are you to pass judgment on me, I know all about your order and the accords and how you spit on them both."
Shock crossed Ovdam's face. Few people on Corin even suspected the Outer Realm's existence, much less the laws and powers that governed them. How had this thief learned of these things? Dirge grinned and launched a flurry of attacks. Ovdam barely avoided the poisoned whirs of death. Dirge would know that Ovdam was immune to the paralytic. He wasn't playing any longer. He was here to kill.
"You see it, don't you?" Dirge said. "You sense the death dripping from my blades. Well, let me tell you a little story,
Dirge danced left, then right, and spun and stabbed. Ovdam blocked the attacks, but only just. His counterattack sliced through cloth, but left flesh untouched.
"Deep in the desert of my homeland lives a spider, a tiny thing so easily missed, not like the giant monstrosities that the dark forests harbor. No, the mother of death is barely the size of a thumbnail, but it bears a gift unlike any other, a poison made of the distilled essence of all spheres."
Dirge lunged again. Ovdam ducked and rolled and felt the blade zip by his ear.
"Most poisons can be countered by their antipathetic magic. Life can cure death. Death, life,"
Dirge said with a grin at his witticism.
"But the mother of death mixes all spheres in her tiny crystalline body. A single drop of mother's milk will bring the full power of every sphere to bear. No immunities can counter it. No antidote exists. You will feel as if you are on fire while you are drowning. Your breath will be torn from your lungs as your blood turns to dust."
Dirge spun and threw a dagger at Ovdam. A pulse of ether took control of Ovdam's body, tossing him aside before his mind was even aware what was happening. So attuned to the ether was Ovdam.
"Impressive," Dirge said in surprise. "Now, I won't bore you with what the rest of the spheres do, save one. Those who succumb to mother's milk lose their immortal soul. The poison eats away at the core of your being, feeding he who delivered the killing blow. This is how I knew what power the Barrow King possessed. This is how I knew what bargain to make."
The man's impossible knowledge stunned Ovdam. The Egyptians had long claimed ancient and secret knowledge, but most of the mystery schools were shams, feeding power to charlatans. Soul magic was a rare affinity with even fewer practitioners. Dirge backed Ovdam up further, and he stumbled over the desiccated corpse of a twice-killed dread knight. The warrior monk went down, and Dirge jumped, putting weight and momentum into his deadly knife. Dirge came down hard on Ovdam's sword hand, snapping his wrist. His sword fell from his hand, and he barely caught the arm, arresting the dagger's deadly intent. Normally, Ovdam was much stronger than the thief, but he was on his back, one arm immobile. Dirge had the superior position, and he leaned his entire body weight into his knife arm. Slowly, the blade came closer. Ovrim could see a milky white sheen on the blade and knew that the Egyptian had not been lying. Death was mere millimeters away and coming for him. Dirge pushed all his weight down and pushed his face near Ovrim's. In a low voice full of malice and hatred, Dirge whispered,
"Dearest mother, I offer you a gift."
Desperate, Ovrim pumped his mind full of spirit energy, and the ether took a hold of him. He could feel every mote in the room. His friends facing off against the Barrow King, the summoned demon raging against a horde of dread knights, Tifla firing life bolts in and around the giant devil, pot shots that found their target more often than not. Only Ovrim was near death. Then his mind found salvation, and he grinned.
"What are you grinning at, you madman?"
Dirge asked as the knife tip came ever closer to Ovrim's face. "I think you dropped something." Ovrim's mind grabbed into Dirge's other blade, another blade soaked in death, and called it. A flash of metal flew past Dirge and embedded itself in the wall behind Ovrim. The movement startled Dirge, but then he laughed.
"Missed!"
"Did I?" Ovrim said, as a single drop of blood welled on Dirge's cheek. The thief's eyes went wide, and he backed off of Ovrim like a man bitten. His hands trembled as his fingers came to his face. They pulled away, marred by a small dot of crimson.
"You bastard!"
Dirge began, but then his body seized. He fell back, choking and burning. Boils and pustules erupted from his skin. His eyes turned crystalline, and his skin glowed a warm yellow light. His skin sloughed off as if 10 years of decomposition had occurred in mere seconds. Dirge stopped moving, and his body turned to dust. Ovrim reached out with his mind and felt the small man's soul die. A sin of the highest order, and Ovrim was responsible. A tear rolled down Ovrim's cheek as he stood. "Forgive me, the unforgivable." Then he heard Tifla scream.